Hello and welcome to episode 516 of the Unauthorized History of the Pacific War podcast. My name is Seth Paridon, historian and deputy director of the Mississippi Armed Forces Museum, and with me, as always, is my co-host, esteemed author and historian and good buddy, John Parshall. How are you this fine July day, John?
I am very well, thank you. I think you and I both are continuing to nerd out watching the exploration that's going on with the Nautilus team
Oh yeah.
over in Iron Bottom Sound. We found Japanese destroyer Terazuki last night and found her stern this morning. Um, and I just we should give a shout out because there are some people on the
Mm,
Scientist channel on that expedition. Randy Stone is really knowledgeable. Seth,
John Womack.
Jonathan Womack, that
Holy
guy.
moly.
Holy, I don't know what's going on there, but yeah, he was the one that this morning, as we're transiting to another target, he was like, "Wait a minute, that looks like that could be the stern," and they stopped the ROV and went back and put it down, and sure as hell, there was Terazuki's stern. So
Yeah.
gold star for Jonathan, gold star for the people on that channel. Just in general, it's been really fascinating watching that whole interchange on that chat group. So
It has been great fun and it's been an honor to be a part of it, so to speak.
yeah,
And I got to tell you, I was watching, I don't know, Japanese DDs are not my thing.
yeah.
Uh, I was watching the feed yesterday over my shoulder, and I was watching your chat, and it's like watching a dude open his Christmas present when
Oh
you identified
well,
Teratsuki. I was like,
yeah. So the fun part of that was that we were expecting that this target was going to be a Yugumo class destroyer, and so the camera comes up and relatively short order, we see one of the gun turrets, and I'm like, nope, that's a 3.9-inch gun turret. It's one of those 100 millimeter twins on the Akazuki, and Randy immediately is like, well, if it's 3.9, it's got to be Terazuki. So we had the ID like now, as soon as we saw the pictures of the gun turret. That was
that was
really,
awesome.
yeah, the hive mind. It works. So anyway, good
Yeah,
fun.
no, that was awesome. That was awesome. And it's still, I don't know where they're going next. I know they're going to explore some
Yeah, there's
sonar
another.
hits, and they're going
Yeah.
to go,
Well,
yeah.
the other cool part about this expedition is that there's this remotely controlled sonar ROV that's cruising
Hmm.
around up on the surface called the Drix that is
Yeah,
looking for
popping
other
stuff. Yeah.
sonar. And it was a Drix contact that ended up identifying Terazuki. So it's really kind of cool watching all of the technological pieces come together here to do this really comprehensive survey of the sound. It's been really neat.
Drix found what turned out to be the bow of the New Orleans as well.
Another incredibly cool find. I was not there to see that one, but you were, weren't you?
I was all over that one, like this awesome shirt I'm wearing right now. And I tell you, the amount of time that it took to identify that chunk of bow was about, and I kid you not, about 4.5 to 5 hours. It was,
Really?
and we were fairly certain of what it was almost from the get-go.
Yeah,
But it was more process of elimination that it can't be A, B, or C
right.
before we were absolutely, yeah. And we were partially able to identify some of the markings on the bottom of the anchor flukes
Yeah,
and we kind of sort of pinpointed it to Brooklyn Navy Yard, which of course is where New Orleans was built and everything else. So yeah,
right.
it was cool, a lot of
Well,
fun.
we're gonna have to do some follow-on episodes on that just
Absolutely,
because that was
because it's way
really
cool.
because it's way cool. Anyway,
Way cool.
all
All right.
right, but today we're talking about Pearl Harbor.
Indeed. Actually, the
My God.
preparations therefore. So last week, as you are probably aware, we talked about the Japanese planning for Pearl Harbor and all the intricacies and the heretofores and where to theirs and all that other jazz. And we didn't talk about the United States because that's what we're going to do today. So I don't have a very long intro because I didn't feel like writing one. So we're going to just jump into, but just suffice it to say, and I'm being dead serious here, suffice it to say that the lack of preparation for the United States in the Hawaiian Department, which is going to be, of course, the United States Army, the Army Air Corps, the Navy, the 14th Naval District, the whole shebang is
Yep.
is frighteningly bad, shall we say.
Right.
Frighteningly bad. And there's multiple reasons why we'll get into that now. But to start it off, we got to talk about the two cats who get for lack of a better term, crucified at the end of all this stuff. And this is going to be, of course, husband Kimmel and Walter Short. So we'll start with Kimmel first. For
Yeah.
those of you who don't know, and we'll get into a little bit of bio. We're not going to go through the man's entire life story, but there's some interesting things that I pulled out and put in the notes here. That's like, if you read about this and you read about the dude and you kind of try to understand who he was, it makes it all the more baffling as to why he was so completely unprepared for the things that happen. So he graduates
Right.
from Annapolis in 1904. He goes, he's one of his classmates is Bill Halsey,
Mhm.
who is a lifelong friend of Kimmel for Kimmel's rest of his days. Just like everybody else in that generation, he's a battleship
Dude.
admiral. He's a battleship sailor. Yeah, he sails with the Great White Fleet for crying out loud, goes to
Right.
Veracruz with Willis Lee. So, I mean,
Yeah.
he knows all these dudes. He knows all these guys. Um, he is CO of USS New York and then becomes CO of a destroyer squadron before getting his first star in 1937.
Yeah.
And everything you read about the dude, everything you read about Kimmel, it says all of his fitness reports and all the biographical information says that he was an incredibly efficient officer to the point of, we can get into some of the nitpicks that he would do, but I mean, he was known as a guy who got things done all the time, and that's why he
He
got to the
kind
position he was.
Right. He kind of reminds me of Ernest King, to be honest with you. I mean, he's
Mm,
that same sort of he, he can be kind of a jerk. I mean, he has this reputation for if he's commanding a squadron or something like that, he will show up at the drop of a hat and do a snap inspection. And then, oh, while I'm here, let's, do this exercise or that exercise, run
absolutely.
your crew through your paces for me, Mr. Skipper. And if your crew does not come up to snuff, guess what? I'm going to rip you a new one. And yeah, so not the kind of guy who's going to engender a lot of affection at the ranks immediately below him. I mean, if you're a CO serving underneath Kimmel, you are definitely on your toes or have to be because the old man could show up at any point in time and rain on your fit rep.
Yeah.
So yeah,
And it literally at sea.
at sea. Yeah.
Because there's a story, and I highlighted that in here. They were doing fleet maneuvers, and this is before he's sink pack, for lack of a better term. We'll call it,
Yeah.
just say that. He's fleet commander of the Pacific Fleet at this time. Or, I'm sorry, this is 1940 during the fleet problems.
Okay.
And there was a destroyer that was not keeping pace with the rest of the
Right.
formation. And he like sent signal flags, like, what is the deal? Why are you not keeping pace? Da 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 da. And the destroyer, basically wrote back via signal flag, "Hey, I'm having mechanicals. We're sorting it
Yep.
out." Boom, 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 boom. So whatever. So they get back into port. Kimmel goes and finds the report from that destroyer, and I don't remember which one it was.
Yeah.
Finds out that there was a burnt bearing or a bad bearing or something like that that was causing this thing not to keep pace.
He's reading the reports from the engineering officer.
Yeah. Yeah, which is way below his concern level.
Yeah,
And reads this skipper the riot act because he didn't have, he didn't
didn't
repair
act,
the, yeah.
did not act on the report that his subordinates were sending him that, we've got a problem here in the engines and yeah, we need to get this fixed.
Not, yeah,
Yeah, that's just, yeah, the skipper in question could not have been a happy dude. But
no,
again, that is very much the kind of thing that an Ernie King would do too, in that Kimmel, with one key difference, I guess I would say. The thing about Ernest King was that not only would he read the reports, but he probably would have told you how to actually fix the bearing. I mean, he had that depth of practical knowledge on practically anything having to do with warships at that point. I'm not sure that Kimmel had that same depth, but the fact that Kimmel would go back through those records and look through the reports and with malice aforethought. I mean, that's the thing.
yes,
This is not being done with a sort of a collegial collaborative, here's how we learn from this sort of thing. This is, I'm going to get you.
yeah. I'm,
And
I'm gonna
that
nail you to the tree, man.
I'm going to nail you to the tree. And that's not a comfortable environment to be working in.
Not at all. So he takes command of the fleet. When he gets out there, he's immediately aware. And I mean, people can say what you want, but the fleet was not how we'd like to imagine it to be in the late
Right.
1930s, early 1940s.
Sure.
And I mean by that for multiple things is that there was a lack of training in the United
Yep.
States Navy, especially in the Pacific. There was a lack of training. There's a lack of material. There's a lack of pretty much everything, really.
Yeah.
And you got to remember, this is the tail end of the Depression. This is the late 30s, early 40s. And there's not, the funding for training was not always there and different things. Go ahead.
And that's something I think when we at 80 years removed think about training, we tend to think of it as a sort of free commodity, that well you
Mhm.
can train constantly. And yes, there are certain things that you can train for that are free, but if you want to do things like live fire exercises,
Yes.
ammo costs money, and the Navy hasn't had a lot of money to be paying for extra ammunition for live fire stuff. You could make an argument that that's part of what was going on with our torpedo problems at the beginning of the year, although there's all sorts of engineering problems that feed into that. In any case, the truth of the matter is that part of the reason our fleet was not as well trained as it ought to have been is they're just, as you say, were not the monies available
Yeah.
to go out and do that kind of stuff.
So when he does get the job and he goes out there, again, as I said, that's the one thing he's like, oh my God. He's like, because he was an absolute fanatic for training, and which most good naval
Which is
officers
good.
are. Yeah, that's
Yes,
not a
right.
bad thing
No,
because he's like, if we train, because he's not stupid. He knows why the fleet's out there. He knows because he comes in, of course, after Richardson, who raises a
right.
kerfluffle and gets basically fired by FDR, and Kimmel goes out there, and he knows that they're out there for a reason. He's not stupid.
Right.
And he
And
knows that the fleet is woefully unprepared. So he just starts pouring hours into training, which the fleet desperately needed. So where he gets the money and the funds in the material for this, I do not know. But he does, and he takes these guys out all the time. The fleet goes out, or various portions
yep,
thereof, not the whole fleet very often, but usually pieces,
chunks of
parts.
it.
Yeah, they go out and they train for like all week, and they're
Yep,
out there doing live fires, they're doing maneuvers, they're doing night maneuvers even. And he's running these guys into the ground. And to
yeah,
your point of not being loved, and he wasn't loved by a lot of people, but some of the older salts knew what he was doing and why.
yeah,
And to that end, they did like him because he's like, they're all these chiefs had been in the Navy for 40 years are sitting there going, well, he's preparing us for the war that we're probably going to get into.
right.
So I can't really fault the guy for being a jerk, but at least he's trying. And that's,
Yeah,
to a point, that's what he was doing.
right. Yeah, I was just going to then segue to say that one of the problems, though, is that when he's training, he is training with offensive activities
Yes.
100% in mind. Kimmel believes that when and if the war begins and the balloon goes up, that he is not going to be the target of an attack, but he is now going to have to do exactly what the Japanese had feared, which was counterattack across the Central Pacific, probably into the Marshall Islands, and foment a fleet action in the Marshalls. And so as a result, his battle line is training for offensive action. And a lot of his scouting assets, the PBYs that are in Hawaii, are likewise training for we're going to have to, move our bases up into the Marshalls once we get a foothold there. And then we're going to be doing offensive scouting activities in support of the battle fleet to foment that fleet action. So one of the, just from a big picture, one of the problems that we have trying to defend this fleet at Anchorage is that the commanding admiral is 100% oriented towards war fighting out in the
Yes.
Central Pacific, which is also somewhat laudable. It just turns out to be the wrong solution at the wrong time if you don't
Right.
understand the threat environment that is going to be coming your way in December.
Which goes back to what we talked about last week, that no one
No one
had
understands that.
any idea. Nobody knew anything about that kind of thing. And the threat environment was coming to you. It wasn't
Yes.
necessarily Pearl Harbor or Oahu, I should say.
Yeah.
So when he does get the job as, and I find this acronym to be ridiculous because the military works on acronyms even to this day, Commander in Chief U.S. Fleet, SINCUS.
Was he though?
So before King took over that
Yes.
moniker,
Yes.
Sincus was the U.S. fleet in the Pacific, and then it
Okay.
changes to Sink Back, which is what he holds, and that's how we know him today,
Got it.
Sink Back.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
King is the one that's the
Yeah. Like,
Sincus title goes
yeah.
over to
Yeah.
DC, and then he says he's like, "No, this ain't gonna work. I'm not gonna
Yeah.
be known as Sincus after Pearl
Yeah.
Harbor, so we're gonna change this to Cominch, by the way."
Yeah.
But
Okay.
regardless of this, so
Right.
he gets the job via Frank Knox and FDR because FDR knew who he was, and what's his name? Kimmel had actually served as an aide to FDR when FDR was Assistant Secretary of the Navy, so they were aware of each other's presence.
Right.
And when he gets the job as SyncPack, it floors him because much like the man who's going to replace him, Nimitz, there were several other guys who were significantly senior to him who would have theoretically been in line to take that job.
Well, and one of those guys that was bandied about was Nimitz.
Right,
Um, you
right.
know, and Nimitz is like, no, I'm not going to take that gig. And thank heavens he didn't, because it
He
very
also would have been
likely,
crucified.
yeah, he would have been the scapegoat for what's coming.
Yeah.
I have a certain degree of sympathy for any admiral who is in that role, because my contention has been that the Japanese have created this essentially a revolutionary technological and theoretical leap at this point. Whoever is going to be on the receiving end of that is going to have a very, very rough day at the office. And I don't think that Horatio Hornblower himself was going to get out of a shellacking at the hands of Kita Butai when it raises the curtain. So anyway,
And
Kimmel gets that job.
for reasons we're going to spit out here in a minute, you're 100% right. If Nimitz would have been there, he'd have been hung out to dry too.
He's toast.
Because yeah, it's a lack of availability of people and machinery as we're going to see.
Yeah,
So he writes, ironically enough, he writes to Chester Nimitz upon Kimmel getting the job. He says, quote, "My satisfaction is mixed with anxiety as to whether or not I shall measure up," unquote. Which, I think Kimmel gets a bad rap, and as we're going to see, he probably deserves a lot of the rep that he gets. But everything he had done before now, he was good at, like
yeah,
very, very good at. He'd succeeded in every single thing he'd ever done. He'd never failed at anything.
yeah,
Hence the reason that he's being put in this position. And he was an aggressive guy. As we said, he was a stickler for training. He was, would consistently bemoan the state of the fleet to Secretary of Navy Frank Knox and be like, "Give me some more money, give me some more ships. I need more men, blah, 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 blah." So,
yeah,
I mean, the guy was really good at what he did, but there are some things that he could have done better, I think. So,
yeah.
um, so the one thing I did put in here, and we'll talk about this probably throughout this episode, is that among the upper echelon naval officers, of which Kimmel was obviously one, the thought of Pearl Harbor being attacked was like way back here. It was
Down the totem pole.
yeah, way far off because the way the Navy figured that the war, and the Army too for that matter, that the war would start would be way out in the Pacific around the Philippines, or at
Yep.
the very least around Guam or Wake or someplace like that, but not Pearl Harbor. So it was they were a backwater, or what they thought they were going to be, a backwater at that
Yeah.
time. So
Sufficiently
good.
distant from the enemy that, yeah, that we're not going to get hit. Even though, as we said in the last episode, in some of our fleet problems, we have done raids, carrier
Yes.
raids against Oahu. So
Yeah. He in April 1941, he did begin to prepare for whatever he could. And I thought this was kind of cool. He instructed United States naval aviators to orient themselves with Army airfields and how they did things and where things were in the event of an attack, that they wouldn't necessarily have to land on Fort Island or to go to Kaneohe or what was it,
right,
Eva Mooring Mast, places like that. They could land,
on Army fields. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. So he was trying to participate in the planning operations as things go down. And as we'll see when Walter Short gets aboard, they actually start to do some coordination, but the coordination lacks significant communication, which is ultimately going to be the problem here.
right.
So
Yeah,
to your point, he institutes night firing exercises, main battery and secondary battery firing drills. These become, what you were saying, live fire drills now, AAA firing drills, all this kind of thing. And he does try to prepare the fleet for something if it was to occur. But there was one thing I wanted to point out in here. Let me see if I can find it in the stinking notes now. I just walked right past it.
You hate that.
I do hate that. That drives me absolutely bonkers. But one of the things, oh, yeah, here it is. One of the things that he did do, Kimmel had a big mouth. And I think that's part of the reason that did not endear him to a lot of people, not just his JOs, but his people above
Hmm.
him too. Because as war clouds are darkening, as we like to say, a lot
I
of
just got
the
an just got an email message on that from my editor this morning. He's like he just hates all cliches and must stab them in the heart. And so yeah, I'm constantly, jibing him back on my email. Yeah, war clouds are darkening, Tim. So anyway, war clouds are darkening.
but they are, and to be perfectly cliche, they are darkening. And FDR, for as much as I love the man, he was looking in the Atlantic. He
Hmm.
was looking to Europe because that's where he figured that the threat was going to come from. That's where most people, again, they knew that the Japanese were going to be a problem and that we were probably going to go to war with them, but that was not the main concern. The main concern was in Europe. So what
Yeah,
FDR and Frank Knox were doing were stripping a lot of the old hands out of the Pacific Fleet and sending them to Europe, or not to Europe, I'm sorry, to the Atlantic side. And
right.
this is one of the
Yeah,
things that Kimmel starts pissing and moaning about is like, how can I maintain a state of readiness in the
yeah,
Pacific Fleet if you're taking all my guys with all the damn experience and you're leaving me with a bunch of 17 and 18-year-old boys who, God love them, don't have
yeah,
the experience of the 30-year-old chief that you just pulled off to Tennessee and sent him
yeah,
over here to, wherever out on the Atlantic coast.
yeah.
So that was one of the reasons that he continued to ramp up that training, and there was nothing that could be done about it. All these people are getting stripped out of here. He's losing ships too. He's losing especially destroyers. A lot of
Yeah,
the destroyers are being pulled out of the Pacific Fleet, some cruisers too, and they're being sent over to the Atlantic because that's where Roosevelt figured that the war would come before any place else.
right. Nevertheless, he still manages to attain a pretty high level of readiness within his force. His battleship commander, Admiral Pi, says that at the eve of war, that the Pac fleet enjoyed the highest state of efficiency it had ever attained. And Kimmel likewise says gunnery in the fleet is better, morale of the officers and men is high, and everyone is working to the limit of their capacity. We are never satisfied, but we feel that we are making progress and getting dividends for our efforts. And he's probably right.
He probably is right. And I mean, again, if you look at the harbor traffic
Yeah.
that's coming in and out of Pearl, and the Japanese, we can talk about this too. They do have a spy in there who's noting all this stuff,
Yes. Yeah.
but they're going out and they're not just going around, throwing wet in the line and catching fish. I mean, they're doing things, they're out
Yes.
there training, as you said, nighttime naval gunfire and all this other things. They're doing things out there trying to prepare, and they were more efficient, but it still, as we know, is going to lack when it comes down to the
Yeah.
time. So Kimmel has his counterpart on the island, and this is a gentleman who also gets the nailed to the tree, shall we say, and that is Walter Short.
Mm-hmm.
Walter Short is the United States Army commander on Oahu. Um, he's an Illinois native. He never graduated from West Point, which I find to be
So,
rather
and,
rare
yeah,
in these
that's an
days.
oddity for sure.
Yeah. You'll see that more later in the war, obviously, but pre-war, and a guy that's going to be assigned to a position of this
Yeah.
importance, that's kind of rare. So that does speak something about Kimmel. He was a graduate of the University of Illinois, actually,
Hmm.
which is not known to be
It's not the Harvard of the Midwest. Yeah, which
no,
it
that's
shouldn't
going
even
to
say
pump
that.
out arm. Well, no, that's not. It's not pumping out a lot of Army general officers. Is my
Yeah,
point.
that's the point
Yeah,
exactly. It's
yeah,
not the
yeah.
West Point of the Midwest. Yeah, so
No, not at all. He was known to be a ridiculously intelligent guy, like a super smart guy. He during the First World War and after that portion of American history, he was a machine gun specialist. They actually his nickname was
mm,
Machine Gun Short, is what they called him.
oh, interesting.
Yeah, and he wrote a treatise on how to employ automatic weapons and the offensive and the defensive for the United States Army that was used, by the way, during the war. So
Okay.
the dude was sharp. He was super, super sharp. He was known as a very austere gentleman and very disciplined. And like Kimmel, I put in the notes, he didn't have a whole lot of friends above him because he was one of these types of Army officers who seems very, congenial. But if something goes wrong, he just
Blows. Yeah.
absolutely loses his stuff, man, loses his mind. So he did not endear himself to a lot of people that worked with him, but George Marshall was impressed with him enough to send him out there. He
Yeah.
gets tagged as the Army commander, and obviously in 1941, he's only there several months. He gets over there in April, I think.
Okay.
I think it's April. Don't quote me on that, but I think it's April 1941. So he's not there a whole hell of a lot of time.
The very
Um,
moment that Kita Butai has just been established.
yeah,
Yeah.
poor sucker.
Yeah.
So he, when he gets out there, and this is kind of where some of the conversation about Short begins, is that as intelligent as he was, and there's no debating that, he didn't seem to understand why he was in Hawaii. He did not seem to understand his job to the point where he writes George Marshall and
Yeah.
essentially asks him,
What am I doing here?
why am I here? What am
Right.
I doing? And not necessarily what you want to ask your boss. You should probably try and find that out before you ask the old man,
Right.
why did you send me and my wife, by the way, to Hawaii? And it's Marshall does not react to that well. I don't have well, actually, I do in this book. They have the full context or most of the context of the letter, and just suffice it to say, it's not very kind. But Marshall tells Short that his primary responsibility was the defense of Oahu and the naval base, and that's not
Yes.
just a minor consideration, which is what Short put in the letter to
Yeah.
General Marshall. He's like, no, dude, this is your job. Your job is to
Right.
protect this. It's not a minor consideration. Your job is to protect the
Primary
Navy.
primary was in all caps. So
Hmm.
yeah, that gives you which which is not the kind of thing that you find with Marshall. He was not a very emotive guy, but yeah,
No.
he kind of lets him know. So anyway, and that's whereas Kimmel, to an extent, has the excuse of, well, my fleet was primarily training for offensive activities. Short's brief from the get go is you are 100% defensive in orientation. Every Army troop on this island is here, for the time being at least, to be defending the fleet base and doing everything it can to protect the Navy when the Navy is in port.
Yeah, that was their job. That
Yep.
was 100% their job. Their job was nothing else but that.
Defense.
So Kimmel or not Short decides he's like, you know what? Maybe I should talk to husband Kimmel or hubby as they called him. Maybe I should talk to Kimmy and figure out what the hell. Let's have a meeting of the minds. And they do
Yep.
this multiple times. And they actually become friends. They're buddies. They
Right.
become golfing buddies. They have as we know, there's the famous story. They're going to go golfing on the Sunday, December 7th, which is very, very true.
Yep.
They would golf every Sunday. They'd play 9 or 18 holes, and they were very, very friendly. And they decided that they were going to try and work out a mutual defense, even though it was not the Navy's responsibility per se.
Hmm.
They also knew that they had to work together because, as we're going to see, they did not have the sufficient amount of people, number one, or
Planes.
materiel, planes specifically, to do the job that they wanted to do.
Yep.
Um, the one thing, though, and they meet dozens of times from April through December 1941, at least once or twice a week.
Yep.
Despite all the meetings, there was very little communication between the two of them. Now, what they were talking about, I frankly don't know. Let's go eat a burger over here or something. I frankly do not know. But
Right.
and this is in the testimony, of the for after the event where they both give their testimonies that Short says, well, I figured that Kimmel was doing this, and Kimmel says, well, I figured Short was doing this, yet they never cross
Yeah.
communicated to find out who was
Yeah.
doing what, if
For the
anything at
amount
all.
for the amount of face to face time, the amount of communication, meaningful communication that came out of that was shockingly small. It would seem.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
Because As Short said, and I'm going to paraphrase this in the investigation after Pearl Harbor, he said that I never asked Kimmel what he was doing because I figured if he's in this job, he knows what he's doing. But if your job is to defend the harbor, homie, you kind
Yeah,
of need to know what the fleet is doing. And
right,
to Short's credit, Kimmel never volunteered that information, nor did
right.
he say, "So what are you going to do today?"
Yeah.
This is what I'm going to do today, which,
Yeah, no, it would have been incredibly useful for Short to have an understanding of what the training evolutions were looking like and when is the fleet going to be in and out, because
Mhm.
that changes the things that you're going to be doing, obviously, from an air defense standpoint. But yeah, there doesn't seem to have been much evidence that that actually happened.
None at all. And Short, when he was asked about the fleet and what the fleet did, and he says, "I don't know where they go. I don't know
Yeah.
what they do when they're out there, and I'm not going to ask."
Which, again, there will be there would be opportunities here. If the fleet is out at sea, you could have been practicing things like extending the Army air envelope over those training exercises to protect the fleet if they had no organic air cover of their own, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, fast forwarding here, the RAF is going to get pilloried for why didn't you have more fighter aircraft over the Repulse and the Prince of Wales? This is the kind of things that air forces should practice with their naval forces, is
Mhm.
how to do that kind of thing. And yeah, we don't
Did
have
not.
any nada here. So,
Did not. So,
so
good,
air
good.
air cover.
Big,
That's the
big
next thing
time.
you got to right.
The defense of Pearl Harbor and Oahu and the whole shooting match, as you said last week, it has to be in an air envelope. It has to be air cover. The one thing that Kimmel in Short did do was basically split the responsibilities.
Yep,
You do this, I'll do this, and we'll work together as best we can with the
yep,
amount of material and people that we have, and we'll do our
yep.
thing.
Yeah, and the bifurcation line is long range scouting. By and large, is going to be the responsibility of the Navy because the Navy has the most PBY scout planes here on Oahu. But local air defense, i.e., putting up pursuit fighters, that's got to be
Yes,
the responsibility of the Army.
absolutely. Because the only time that there are, one of the only time there's really a lot of American naval fighters on Oahu is when the carriers are in port.
Right,
And that is not all the time, obviously.
right.
So the Army's long range search capabilities are going to fall on the famous Boeing B-17.
Hmm.
Kimmel had exactly, I'm not Kimmel, I'm sorry, Short had exactly six
Right.
Boeing B-17s with which to conduct long range patrols.
Yeah.
Six.
And
Six
how many
B-17s ain't gonna get it done.
Manning I get it. And just as sort of a rule of thumb for the listener, if you are running patrol aircraft, the general rule of thumb is you're only going to be able to get like maybe 1 in 3 of those planes up on any given day because you got to do maintenance on them. There are a lack of spare parts in a place like Oahu as well. So, with 6 planes, he's maybe flying 2 of those a day, which means again
Maybe.
that maybe the burden for scouting is mostly on the Navy. The Navy has about 81 PBYs that are available, not all of which are in Patrol Wing 2, which is the primary squadron that is responsible for defensive patrolling around the island. And here, too, is one of the problems with Kimmel's offensive mindset, in that on the face of it, it's like 81 PBYs. That's a hell of a lot of PBYs. But again, only 27 of those probably are available on a daily basis. And actually, it's not even nearly that many because a lot of those PBYs are being slated for offensive training activities with the battle fleet. Because the whole notion here, again, is if we get into a war with Japan, we're going to go to the Marshalls, we're going to fight a battle there, and I'm going to need those PBYs to be scouting offensively for in front of my fleet as I'm making my way over there.
Exactly.
So 81 PBYs, not nearly that many were actually dedicated to scouting activities, and only a third of the ones that were would have been able to fly on any given day, which means that there's not a lot of search vectors available. You're probably not pushing your flights out real far either. So the all round coverage for Oahu is incredibly scanty.
Very much so. And you were about to ask, and I cut you off and I apologize about that, is how many B-17s that would it have taken?
Yeah,
And
you found
Short,
that.
I did. And Short requested, and let's be 100% clear here, is that these guys know, Short and Kimmel both knew that they needed more assets than what they had. And that meant, as you were saying, airplanes, people, and parts.
Parts.
And fuel they did not lack, but
Mhm.
airplanes, people, and parts they did. And Short, to his credit, 100% credit, with the six B-17s that he had, six, he requested immediately, in order for me to do this properly, I need 180 B-17s, which he probably wasn't wrong,
Right.
frankly, because you cannot keep one
Yeah.
crew can't do this every day.
Right.
They can't. These guys are going to get smoked. So with the 180 B-17s that my brother requested, there were 140, 148 in the United States Army Air Corps inventory at that
Our
time.
our entire inventory is
The
148
entire
of these.
inventory. Yeah.
Yeah, which
So
again, we sort of have this mental picture of, Eighth Air Force in 1944 that can put up 2,000 B-17s at at a maximal effort. That is not the case in the middle of 1941. We are
no,
still
man.
very much at the beginning of the production curve here. So,
That
yeah,
production curve doesn't kick in until 42, and even
43,
then, yeah,
43 really. Yeah,
43, yeah.
yeah.
So getting back to the PBY, which is a big ugly bird, but it was neat all the same. So just to give a little nerdery on it, it carried a crew of seven. This is the PBY 5, mind you.
Okay.
It could cruise some 1,400 miles before that bad
Well,
boy had to turn around and come back.
yeah.
So think about this. If it's cruising at 1,400 miles, I think the cruising speed is
Is that its
about.
total range though? Because even at Midway, they were only pushing their patrols out to 700 miles. So,
According to when I was fine, that's what they could do. Now, whether or not that's
okay,
what they did, now we know damn well they didn't patrol
no,
1,400 miles out from Hawaii.
no,
But what they could do and what they did are two totally different things. And
yeah,
we put this in there, and you said 81 PBYs. Um, a dozen, more than a dozen, were actually based on Midway
right.
at this time, which falls under Kimmel's umbrella,
Aegis.
if you,
Yeah.
yes. He doesn't even have that many on Oahu to do what he needs to do. And these
Hmm.
numbers I found were pretty interesting. So for every 10 PBYs ish that rolled off the line, almost half of them went to Europe at that time. And the majority of them went to the Atlantic patrolling squadrons. And he said, how the hell am I going to scout in this, big fan if I don't have the aircraft that I need? And exactly the numbers are here. 336 PBYs were produced in 1941.
Hmm.
97 went to the RAF, 21 to the RCAF, 18 to the Dutch, 16 to the Australians, which left 184 of the 336 produced for
Right.
United States naval use. And as we know,
A lot
81
of
of
those end up.
which were, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of the total inventory of this particular aircraft, again, Oahu does have a significant chunk of that total inventory. It's just that it's insufficient to do the sort of all around long range coverage that we kind of envision in our minds. The aircraft just weren't there.
So it was estimated, and neither were the guys. And this is, I think, frankly, more important because if you got the parts, even if you got 81 aircraft, which we know, let's just call it 70, you
Yeah.
got 70 birds and you got the parts, you can keep those things in the air for a while, but you got to have the dudes to man it. So it was estimated that one crew could fly a search mission every 3 days.
Hmm.
And there simply was not enough guys. Consistent searches would require between 225 to 250 crews
Yeah.
and 150 to 175 aircraft. That's what Kimmel's people figured would be needed to maintain a consistent aerial search umbrella on the island of Oahu. And as we
Right.
said, there are 81, probably 70, 65 at any one time that can fly.
Yeah.
Nowhere close.
Not happening.
So we go back to the whole theory that, Kimmel's under orders to search. He knows he has to search, but in his mind, there's no reason to really search too damn hard because if war does come, Pearl Harbor is not going to be the place that the Japanese are going to hit.
Right.
And this
It's
goes
in the
back to,
Philippines. It's
yeah,
yeah.
it goes back to, how we war planned the whole damn war with War Plan Orange and Rainbow and all that, is that the Philippines are going to fall, probably.
Yep.
And if they're the first ones to get hit, we're going to sally forth and go hit, as you say, the Japanese and the Marshalls, and then make our way to the Philippines and relieve the force, or do whatever we can out there. Pearl Harbor was not even in their front of their minds as being a target for attack. And I think that goes into a lot of the lackadaisical way they looked at approaching the
Yep.
defense of the island, frankly.
Yep.
All right. So let's get to, we talked about Kimmel's, aspects on how he envisioned everything. He was an offensive minded guy. General Walter Short was more concerned with defense. That was his primary job. But even above that, he was more concerned with sabotage.
Sabotage.
So I know
Yep.
that's the
Sorry,
first
had to
thing I
do
thought
that.
of too.
I know.
No, first thing I
Just
thought
have to
of.
do the gratuitous Beastie Boys thing there. But anyway.
So sabotage was considered the main threat to anything, not just naval facilities, but army facilities too,
Yep.
on the island of Oahu. Short's intelligence officer, a gentleman named Lieutenant Colonel Kendall Fiedler, could not conceive that with Oahu's mixed population, there were not some, quote, and these are his words, Japanese engaging in subversive activities, unquote.
The mythical fifth column, baby.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
And it goes all the way back to Washington, D.C. And these are Americans on both sides of the aisle, mind you. Both parties are
Yep.
figuring that the Japanese that are living in Hawaii, specifically Oahu, are the
Yep.
main threat to anything that would ever happen there. That the Japanese are going to go like dynamite under the B-17s and kablooey, and up they go.
Right. Because we have
Um,
40% of the population of Oahu is of Japanese descent. So there's about 160,000 Nisei or Sansei residents there who have, Japanese ancestry, two, three, four, however many generations back. And so, yeah, the whole fifth column thing raises its ugly head here, and that just informs everything that Short ends up doing in terms of defensive preparations.
which of course is his downfall, frankly.
Famously, yeah, right,
There was a senator named Guy Gillette. He said, and I quote, the Japanese in Hawaii were a thorn in the Army and Navy's side, and that in the event of an attack, that the local Japanese would, quote, move to cripple the Pacific Fleet, unquote. How they would do that, I frankly don't know.
yeah.
But yeah,
Which and we should also just set it aside here too and say this is grossly unfair to
you think?
the Japanese residents who are on the island. Obviously, as 442 Regimental Combat Team will go on to prove, these people had a chip on their shoulders after being looked at as sort of second class citizens, when in fact, almost to a person, they were loyal to the United States and demonstrated that in spades. So, anyway,
This is it's almost paranoia is where
yeah,
it gets to, because and I put this in the notes, and I'm not making any of this up. The Army was concerned with weapons caches. If you've ever been to Hawaii, which we both have, especially Oahu, which we both have,
yeah,
there's a lot of mountains there, and there's a
yeah,
lot of places where technically, if you wanted to, you could hide things if you had that
right,
desire to do so. The Army was frankly infatuated with the idea that there were weapons caches hidden somewhere in Oahu's mountains that these Japanese civilians were going to
yeah.
get
Go
to and
How
do whatever they
exactly
were
you
going to do.
sink major warships with rifles and grenades, I'm not exactly sure how that works, but just the sheer number of military personnel that were around the naval anchorage, and you're going to try to attack this thing with, you know, irregular personnel.
Yeah.
It's ludicrous. So
The Army kept lists of Japanese that were potential agents and whom would be rounded up immediately if hostilities began.
yeah,
Their homes were pinpointed. No kidding, on like they had a map on a damn wall and they had a pin where this. Mr.
Yeah,
Hayakawa lived or whatever, and they were going
right.
to go pick his ass up if the shooting started, and they were going to, I guess, throw him in the cooler until things cooled down. It
Yeah,
was insane. This is at Schofield Barracks where this is going on, by the way. And just to put 100% clear, with the exception of one spy that we know of, and we'll talk about him in a little bit, nothing had been done by
nothing.
the Japanese population on Oahu ever.
Yeah,
No sabotage, no nefarious acts, no, as I put, acts of mayhem, which is what the army called
right,
it. And I kind
right.
of thought that was funny. I had to chuckle. There were no
Yeah,
sleeper cells, none of this.
yeah,
Literally, jack squat.
yeah. Which speaks to a complete and total lack of ground-based intelligence on Oahu. I mean, where are your
Big
human
time.
assets that are
Yeah.
supposedly did you not think to maybe try to infiltrate some of these scary cells or whatnot? No, there was none of that because there was nothing to infiltrate.
No, nothing at all. And it comes down all the way from George Marshall, too. And I put this quote in here, and this is from Marshall too short. Quote, desired that you initiate forthwith all additional measures necessary for protection of your establishment's property and equipment against sabotage, unquote. So
Right.
even the boss was concerned
Yeah.
with sabotage and for
Yeah.
no good reason at all. So, of course, what happens here, as we all know, is that Short decides to take the airplanes, which, by the way, most of them, especially the P-40s, were a lot of them were in revetments, and there's footage of this stuff. You can see them. They're in these like concrete little igloo things, and they were parked in these revetments, or at the very least up in the trees. They were somewhat out of the view, and because they were potential targets for sabotage, where somebody could literally roll up there and toss a grenade in a cockpit or
Also,
something,
grenade, right?
they decide to cluster them all in the middle of the airfield because they're easier to guard, which also makes them easier
Really
to
good targets. Yeah.
strafe. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and that's not 100% true. In the one of the things that Mike Wenger has pointed out to me during some of the conversations we've had is that not every single Army plane on the island was moved out to the middle of an airfield,
Mm.
but um,
A lot of them were,
certainly
though.
a
Yeah.
lot of them were. Yeah, there were fewer in revetments than there should have been. That is certainly true.
If they had
So
left them where they were supposed to be, it probably wouldn't have been as bad.
yeah,
That's the bottom. That's the
yeah,
bottom, man.
dispersion is always the way to go against heavy firepower. So
So we were talking about scouting assets or lack thereof. And the overall plan for the defense of Oahu was to sight the Japanese long before they ever get to Hawaii, and then go out
attack
there
them.
and,
Yeah,
yeah, do your fleet thing out there with them out in the waters before they ever get to Hawaii. But the one thing that the United States Army did have up their sleeve was radar.
yep.
And we all know what we're talking about. We're talking about specific, and there were several mobile radar sites, but we're talking about one in particular, and this is Opana Point.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he had little faith in radar, which was not uncommon at that time.
Not uncommon at all. Yep.
No, no, and he was very doubtful as to whether or not these mobile radar stations would actually do what they were supposed to do, which is pick up incoming aircraft. But lo and behold, they do indeed work. They had set some of these things up, and I put this in here on September 27th, 1941. Enterprise is at sea doing Enterprise things, and her air group is making their way back to Oahu because, as everybody probably knows, when the carriers would get into port or get close to port, they'd launch the air groups out and they'd let them land on Kaneohe or Fort
Yep.
Island or whatever, and then they'd take off and go meet the carrier at sea. So the same thing's happening here. And they did this on purpose. The Navy flew towards the radar station just to see if the radar mobile station would pick them up. And lo and behold, they did. They picked them up 85 miles out.
Which is
The Ar
damn good performance by the standards
Yeah,
of the day. Yep.
yeah. And the Army actually had time. Now, admittedly, they were waiting for it, but they had time to scramble fighters, get out there and dogfight with the
Yep.
Navy 26 miles away from Oahu.
Which is
And of
about par
course,
for the course for 1942 sort of
yeah,
intercepts. Yeah. 25
yeah.
miles thereabouts. Yep.
And the Army report says, of course, it destroyed the incoming Navy force, which, whether it
Because
did or
B
it didn't, it doesn't
36s.
matter.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. The
They
point
they
of the
went
matter
out there
was
and they did their thing.
they did the thing. Yay, team.
So at the end of September, Short is like, "Meh." Okay, yeah, they do work. So what he does immediately, and rightfully so, is he writes back to DC and says, I need more of these things. They do
Yep.
work. I need more of these things. And he doesn't get them.
No.
He does not get them. So one of the things that the Army does do is to coordinate these radar stations to a degree. They set up basically a CIC is essentially
Yep.
what it is. And it's
Information center. Yep.
an information center, and it's on the top of a concrete storage building at Fort Shafter. And this is where everything, all this information is supposed to come. And then there's an officer that's going to be in that information center, and he is supposed to disseminate orders to different units to go do this and go do that and intercept them here or go investigate this here. And as and
Fast forward to the movie Tora Tora Tora. Spoiler alert: this is going to be our buddy Kermit Tyler, who's going to be the
yes,
duty officer at this information center. The key problem here is that, yeah, Short set this thing up for the Army, but he never gets the Navy involved. So there's no
mm-mm,
naval officer at this information center, because if your job is defending the fleet, it might be good if the Navy knew that there were planes coming in against its fleet. And this leads into one of the common misperceptions about this battle. I mean, we see this famous scene, of course, in Tora Tora Tora. Poor Kermit Tyler, who both you and I met. You knew the guy.
I did know him.
Kermit Tyler, gets this erroneous, or not erroneous, he gets this sighting report, and he famously says, don't worry about it. Kermit Tyler, even if he had been concerned, even had the enlisted men up and upon a point actually given him some good indications as to, how many planes we were potentially looking at and what their vector was, et cetera, et cetera. Kermit Tyler had no ability to like pick up a phone and
Mm-mm.
call husband Kimmel or the duty officer in Pearl Harbor or anything like that and let them know that there's a problem here. So we kind of need to give Kermit a bit of a pass, is kind of what it comes down to.
And I would love to do that because yes, I did know Kermit Tyler. He was a great guy. I met him in his obviously in his latter stages of his life. He lived in San Diego in a house that he'd lived in for I don't know 60 years. And I just tell this brief story. I walked up to his door in his house in and a lot of old houses in San Diego don't have air conditioning, and his was
Mm,
one of the ones that did not. And it was in about June or July, and it was about 95 degrees outside.
right,
But when he opens the door, he's standing there in a pair of board shorts and a t-shirt.
right.
And I'm like, Colonel Tyler, we, exchange pleasantries. And I walk into his door, into his living room, and he's all along the wall are surfboards. And he was a
Wow.
surfer. Like he
Okay.
was a no, honest to
Serious
God.
surfer.
Yeah. I asked him, I was like, how's your day been going? He's like, oh, I just got back. I was surfing that day. He was like 92 and he was out in the Pacific surfing. So God love Kermit Tyler, but he got the shaft at
Yeah.
Fort Shafter, no pun intended, but he
Yeah.
did. He did
And he
because
had to live with that for 70 years or whatever the hell.
yeah,
Yeah.
he had people blaming him for the
Right.
failure, of the United States response to the incoming threat. And we can get into this when we get to that stage of the story, in an episode or two. He had no training.
Yeah.
He was a fighter
He wasn't
pilot,
even
for
supposed to
Christ's
be
sakes.
there that day. That's
No,
the
he
other thing.
wasn't.
So,
Yeah,
eh,
he was taking somebody's spot. So
yeah.
we'll get to that later. But it's yeah, the dude he really gets a bad rep. He was a great guy. He saw a lot of combat in the Pacific post Pearl Harbor. He was a good dude, really
Hmm.
was, and he got the fuzzy end of the stick, man. So let's you know what? Can
Kimmel,
we take
likewise, also lamented the fact that there was no cross communication between the Army and the Navy. And yeah, would go on later to say, God wish, I wish I had set up that coordination. Oops. Well, hate to say it, but this really is kind of the job of the dudes at the top to think these things through and set
exactly?
up the liaison mechanisms, and they did not do that. So
Ex-
that's kind of a ding.
Exactly. And getting back to before we move on, getting back to the whole purpose of the information center. It's not just to take in the reports of the mobile stations. I mean, that's what they're doing, but it's also to figure out, is this some cat flying through the valleys
Yes.
training? Is this, a private pilot learning how to fly? Is this a
Yep.
flight of B-17s? Is this a flight of SBDs? And that's why the Navy needed to have somebody there, and they never,
Yeah.
exactly to your point, it
Yeah.
never occurred to him to do this. All right, so as we're plodding through all this, we have to get to the U.S. intelligence or lack thereof
Right.
in some instances. And we mentioned sabotage just a minute ago. We finished rapping on
Yeah.
about sabotage and
Yep.
and not the beasties, although I've seen them 5 times live and they're amazing. One of my favorites. But regardless of this, that's not what we're
Yeah.
here to talk about. Is we're here to talk about the actual Japanese spy
Yep.
that is in Oahu. While there was no sleeper cell. There was no, threat from the Japanese civilians. There was a threat from an actual Japanese spy. No kidding. And his
Yep.
last name was Yoshikawa. John, lay it on us about Yoshikawa.
Takeo Yoshikawa. Yoshikawa was a former Japanese Navy person. He had gotten into the service and he served for a few years, but he had a stomach ailment and ended up having to resign as a result of that stomach ailment and nearly considered killing himself as a result of that. He was so bummed out. But he ends up eventually working for Japanese intel. And so, because of his knowledge of naval matters just in general, he ends up getting put out on an ocean liner, the Nitamaru, which does like a bi-weekly run out to Hawaii. And he shows up with the new consulate general out there in 1941. He's under an assumed name, but he's a former naval officer who's now working the intel side of things. And Hawaii was a pretty open, loosey goosey kind of environment at that point in time, and he maybe exploited that sort of lack of preparation for dealing with spies, and he basically had the run of the island. And so there's a tea house, a Japanese tea house in Oahu. I've been there a couple of times actually, that still has the telescope that is up in the second story. You can go up to this place, and it's used for it's a really good view of just the general island. And but he spent a lot of time up there with that telescope, looking down on the anchorage and that sort of thing. He would take sightseeing flights because there were a lot of touristy, hey, let's go fly around the island, get in our Stearman or whatever, sort of biplane. And so he would do that a lot and fly around the anchorage as well. Sometimes he would buy the tickets himself. Other times he would, have other people buy the tickets. But the bottom line is he kind of had the run of the island, and he ends up giving some fairly valuable intelligence to the Japanese Navy. He develops an understanding of sort of the cadence of training. That the ships are generally out during the weekdays, but they do come back on the weekends, so the men can have liberty. And that, of course, factors into the planning around, well, if we're going to attack the Americans, Sunday morning would be a real good time to do that. He ends up publishing a book after the war, and I don't know how much of it I actually believe. I mean, there's some stories in here that he would like, I took a bamboo tube and went swimming around. And
Yeah.
I don't know, Takeo. I'm not sure I'm buying that one.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is that he does develop some good, again, cadence, I think is
Mhm.
important from a planning standpoint, just an understanding of the general movements of the fleet in and out of the harbor. And then eventually he's going to be asked by his handlers back in Tokyo to develop an actual grid system for the
Right.
harbor itself. And that message was intercepted, I believe, but was given fairly short shrift, and people didn't really attach the sort of significance to it that it probably ought to have had.
Yeah, that message that you're referring to, that the United States called it the bomb plot
Right.
message, is what they referred to it as. And it's not the
Yeah.
bomb plot that you're thinking of, but it's a plotting grid system for bombing the harbor.
Right.
And there is, I was not able to find, and you would know better than I, but there is no evidence that the IJN used that
Right.
to plot their bombing runs for their high altitude. Basically, the guys that killed Arizona. There
Right.
is no evidence that they used that, but nevertheless, he did do this. He was asked by the IJN to develop this grid system, and he did. And he
Yeah.
sent this message back to Tokyo, one would imagine, and
Yeah.
it was intercepted. The United States Navy, including husband Kimmel, read it, and so did Edwin Layton, read it, and they knew what it was, but they didn't know why it was being created.
Right. Yeah. The Japanese want to divide our harbor into a grid.
Why?
I wonder why. Oh, and it didn't exactly get round filed, but it did get uh yeah, just kind of shuffled to the back
Yeah.
of the mental board again. Because again, they're in this mindset where we're not going to be attacked out here. So, oh well.
Per Perfect segue to the next topic, which is, as I said, U.S. intel. And there's
Yeah.
a quote in here that I put in here that's incredibly important because this quote from Hanson Baldwin encapsulates the entire thinking of whether or not Pearl Harbor would be attacked and the Japanese capabilities. And it goes like this, and I quote, the
And for those
Japanese,
who don't know, I was just going to say
no, go
Hanson
ahead.
Baldwin was the military correspondent for the New York Times, incredibly famous guy, and honestly, usually extremely perceptive and in some cases prescient. And this is an example of where he is exactly the opposite. So,
But to that end, everybody was of the same mindset. So it's not like he was the lone wolf out there saying Japanese
yeah,
can't do this. Nobody thought. His exact quote goes like this. It says, the Japanese do not have the ability to bring their fleet to Hawaii. Theirs is built for defense, not trans-Pacific operations. We and the British have the only blue water navy on Earth.
oops,
Nope.
nope,
Nope.
nope.
So there are two United States officers in Oahu that completely disagreed with Hanson
Yeah,
Baldwin's assessment of the Japanese ability to launch blue water attacks, and that is going to be Major General Frederick Martin and Rear Admiral Patrick Bellinger. They completely believed that the Japanese not only could, but they probably would, if they had to, attack Pearl Harbor. They noted that Japan had never preceded any major operation with a declaration of war, and this is true. And the
goes right
United,
back to
yeah,
the Russo-Japanese War of 1904-05, where the first inkling that the Russians had that we're in a war now is that you have Japanese torpedo boats attacking your battleship anchorage in Port Arthur. So yeah,
hmm,
that was just kind of how the Japanese rolled.
yes, sounds kind of unique, doesn't it?
Yeah,
So Bellinger, especially Bellinger, more so Bellinger than Martin, but regardless, both of them noted that the Japanese had four aircraft carriers and that they most certainly could attack Pearl Harbor, and it would probably happen at dawn on a Sunday when the United States and the Americans on Oahu were least expecting it. They said that attacking at dawn would allow the Japanese fleet to approach in the dark of night. They would use their submarines in and around the harbor to pick off whatever the aerial strikers did not. And they went on to say that the Japanese could and likely would arrive without being seen and no prior warning from our intelligence.
which is remarkably prescient.
Yeah, it's like they
And
had a
yet,
DeLorean and a flux capacitor, man, like they could go and see into the future.
exactly.
But seriously, man, I mean,
Yeah,
they
yeah,
nail it. They nail
right.
it. And they bring this report, or I guess it's more or less of a case study
Yeah,
to Kimmel and Short, but
yeah,
especially Kimmel saying, hey, brother, just so
yeah.
this
This could
could
happen.
happen.
Yep.
And Kimmel does read it, he does digest it, and he does do some things, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. But it's the farthest thing from his money. He's like, I'm going to do these defensive preparations just to say I did them,
Yeah,
but I really don't think I'm going to need to use them in any way, shape, or form.
yeah,
So, like you said, most people read it, filed it, and forgot about it. But there was one guy who didn't, and that was Edwin Layton. Edwin Layton is a legend.
yeah.
He was Kimmel's top intelligence man in the United States Navy. He was a commander, I think, at this time, or maybe a captain. I forget.
Yeah.
Um, he had lived in Japan. I put in the notes Hawaii, but that clearly was wrong. He lived in Japan. He personally knew Yamamoto, so he knew the Japanese character probably better than most. He knew the Japanese potential strengths and weaknesses better than most. And he was asked by Kimmel to deliver daily updates on naval intelligence, the whereabouts of the Japanese fleet. And he combines a bunch of different sources, not the least of which are reports from Washington, D.C., the British, diplomats in Japan, cryptanalysts in Manila, and those in what they call the dungeon, which of course is Joe Rochefort and Station
Right.
Hypo. And he starts piecing these things together to try and lay an idea of where the hell the Japanese are and what potentially they may be doing. This intel analysis is what it is, takes place very, very late. They don't really
Hmm.
start, Kimmel does not give him orders to really like start digging deep until the beginning, actually the end of November, but it really doesn't start taking effect until the beginning of December, December the 2nd. It's a little late in the game.
Yeah, I was going to say a little late in the game for sure.
So one of the things, and John, you can talk about this, the Japanese, again, there's a myth that we were reading their mail, and we were
Right.
reading their diplomatic mail. There is no question. Magic had broken that code. We were quite, Franklin Roosevelt was reading the diplomatic messages before the Japanese diplomats got them.
Yes.
But the JN-25, the Japanese, the military code, there was no breaking that code. It was traffic analysis. And then, even before then, on the 2nd of December, when he gets these orders to start tracking these people hardcore, the Japanese change their code.
Yeah, exactly. And even the portions that have been broken, I mean, we were never reading very many of the code groups in any case. And so, yeah, you got to piece together from fragmentary intercepts and other, traffic analysis, classic traffic analysis stuff, which is who's transmitting, how much are they transmitting, where are they transmitting from, who are they transmitting to and from. That can let you derive patterns of what is potentially going on. But the bottom line is that by the time we start getting closer to the Pearl Harbor operation, yeah, the Japanese carriers at least have just dropped off the map.
Kimmel had told him he wanted reports on where all the Japanese warships were. And like you said, the four big CVs just ghosted. They were gone. Kimmel, or not Kimmel, Leighton was able to pinpoint at least 50 Japanese warships, and I think it's pretty cool how he was able to do it. Call signs and different things like that.
Yep.
But he was able to identify which ships were where by the fist of
Yeah.
the radio
Certain op.
man.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Everybody, if you're tapping on a telegraph key, you have a certain way that you do that as a human being. And if you are an experienced radio intercept officer, you start picking up on the individual ways that these operators would do their thing. And so I forget which it was, but I feel like for one of the battleships, maybe Harana, that the operator had a notoriously heavy fist, and you could just tell that this guy was just mashing his key, and it's like, oh yeah, that's I forget what ship it is, but anyway, you could start to pick up these individual patterns and thereby associate those individuals with their given ships.
yeah. So the famous quote is, and we'll get to that in a second, and it's kind of humorous, and Kimmel said it in jest, but it's very serious all the same, is that when Leighton hands Kimmel the latest report, and Kimmel looks at it and says, okay, Harn is here, and this is here, and this is there, and where the hell are the four Japanese carriers? Leighton responds, I don't know.
Yeah,
And he's abundantly very blunt. He's like, I don't know. They're not there. And Kimmel asks him, he says the last Leighton knew that they'd been near Formosa during training, and then they just, as we said, they just disappeared off the face of the planet. And Kimmel asked him, "Do you mean to say that they could be rounding Diamond Head and you wouldn't know it?" To
right.
which Leighton said, "Yeah,
Yeah,
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 yeah." That that's a pucker moment. If I'm
yeah.
if I'm
That
Admiral
is
Kimmel and the main threat of an attack on your harbor is an aerial assault, and you don't know where the
potentially.
four Japanese carriers are.
Yeah, but I'm just going to go back here and beat this dead horse that Kimmel doesn't have an idea of what Japanese capabilities are.
Correct, correct.
Nobody in the U.S. Navy has an idea of what Japanese capabilities are. The Japanese didn't have an idea of what their capabilities were even 7 months ago. And by now, the beast that is Kitabutai has just completely metamorphosed over this preceding 6 month time period and is a completely different animal. And again, if Leighton hasn't made the conceptual breakthrough to multi-carrier operations, how can it's impossible to forecast enemy intent when you don't understand their own capabilities, and that's the pickle that we're in at this point.
So as things continue, as war clouds darkening, as they
Darken.
continue to do so,
I'm
all
looking at you.
through, yeah, hey man, you got to
I'm
use it when
looking
it's
at my
there.
editor, who I know doesn't watch these things, so I can say this one's for you, Timothy Bent. Because war clouds were darkening.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
So, and this is all through the latter portion of 1940, all the way through 41. There's one guy in particular who is literally doing this, hey, jumping up and down and throwing his arms in the air and say, like, hey, things could go bad here, things could go bad here. And it's none other than Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Betty Stark.
Yep.
He's the one that is screaming and hollering. He knew Kimmel, intimately. They were very, very good friends. They used to call Kimmel by his nickname at the academy, Mustafa. They were,
I
yeah,
didn't know that.
Mustafa. Yeah, because
Yeah.
his when he was at the academy, that's where most of those guys, of course, get their nicknames. And Kimmel sounded like Kemal, like in Kemal Ataturk, so they called him Mustafa. And that's sort of God, not making it up. And
Oh
that's how
man.
his nickname hung on.
Okay.
And his nickname, Kimmel's nickname was Hubby,
Mus-
Kimmy, or Mustafa.
Mustafa. Okay.
Yeah. But
Whatever.
Stark would send Mustafa letters consistently. And I mean,
Yeah.
I mean like all the time saying, hey, the balloon could go up, things could go bad, we're going
It
to get
could
attacked.
it could happen today or next year.
Yeah.
So
It goes on for little over a year, just under a year. Whereas I put in the notes, chatty Betty Stark told Kimmel and Thomas Hart in the Philippines, by the way, that the war could start literally at any time. It may come tomorrow or not for many months, is actually what he'd say almost
yeah,
every single time, to the point where Bill Halsey, who's running Enterprise and his carriers out there, he started to call these things wolf messages. You can cry
right.
wolf so many times before people are like,
I've heard it all before.
yeah, where's the
Yeah,
damn wolf?
right.
So as negotiations within the United States are deteriorating by November the 27th, when Cordell Hull basically says, I'm out,
Yeah,
I'm done, Betty Stark feels that a stronger message needs to be sent to the Pacific, basically letting them know that things could go down at any time. Again, this is about the 13th, 14th message that they've
right.
had in the last year that regarding this. And this is, of course, the famous war warning.
Warning.
The war warning was sent to everybody in the Pacific, but specifically husband Kimmel and Tommy Hart out in the Philippines. Stark, Roy Ingersoll, and none other than Richmond Kelly Turner crafted the following message, and I'm going to read it verbatim. Quote, this dispatch is to be considered a war warning. Negotiations with Japan looking toward stabilization of the conditions in the Pacific have ceased, and an aggressive move is expected with the next few days. The number and equipment of Japanese troops and the organization of the naval task forces indicates an amphibious expedition against either the Philippines, Tai, Kra Peninsula, or possibly Borneo. Execute an appropriate defensive deployment preparatory to carrying out the tasks assigned in War Plan 46, which was the Navy's war plan.
Hmm.
Inform district and Army authorities a similar warning is being sent by the War Department.
Hmm. Couple of things I'd point out there. Um, Amphibious expedition against either the Philippines, yes, they're going to do that. Thailand, yes, they're going to do that. The Kra Isthmus, yes, they're going to do that. And possibly Borneo soon, not right now. I mean, and actually, the Philippines are going to be delayed by a week too, because the Japanese have a shortage of amphibious lift. But again, to the point that there's just a lot of, they're not necessarily false positives, they're positive positives running around here in these war warning messages, because the Japanese are going to hit the Allies basically everywhere. You could have put Guam on here, Wake as well, they're going to hit those places too. But the one place that is missing, of course, conspicuously from this message is Oahu or Hawaii.
And that is 100% the key. And that was Admiral Kimmel's defense the entire time.
Right.
He said that when he saw and read the message, and he said that he read it about probably 10 times, he said that the phrase war warning stood out because that phrase had never been used. And by the way, Turner and Ingersoll and Stark deliberated on the use of that term for
Yeah.
about 2 days, whether or not they were going to put it in there or not put it in there. And it was Stark that was like, put it in there. Kimmel had never seen, as he said, quote, I never saw that phrase in all my naval experience. It was unique. And
Mm-hmm.
that's the reason it was there. It was in there to pop their ears up and go,
Off
oh
the
damn.
antenna. Yeah.
Yeah, this is now very, very serious. But
Mm-hmm.
exactly to your point, all those locales that were listed in there, which as we know are going to be hit,
Are
Oahu was
way far away. Yeah. Right.
exactly. Oahu was not in there in any way, shape, or form. So Kimmel's reading this and he's like, well, we're not listed in here.
Yeah.
So I guess we're in the clear.
Right.
And to be fair, one could surmise that by reading what is supposed to be the red flag.
Yeah.
They're not listed in there. So it's like if you think we're going to be attacked, and this was Kimmel's defense, and it's frankly viable. If you think you're going to be attacked, then you should put it in there.
Mm-hmm.
But no one thought that they would be. Stark had said for months that Guam, Wake, and the Philippines would probably be the
Yeah.
spear point, if you will, of the Japanese attack, to the point where, as we all know, Kimmel reinforced Wake and Midway with aircraft, which is one reason that, you know, Big E and Lady Lex weren't in Pearl Harbor that morning. But the bottom line is that Kimmel did not see Oahu in there. He felt that the message was vague. He did not believe that it meant anything for him. As he read it, he
Mm-hmm.
said, well, this is Tommy Hart's problem. This isn't my problem. And
Mm-hmm.
Hart read it and he was like, yeah, this is my problem. This is
Yeah.
probably this is going to be a bad day for me when things
Right.
go down. And he was completely aware that they were probably going to be attacked, whereas Kimmel did not. Um, One thing too that Kimmel said later in his defense is that he felt or he thought that he was getting all the latest information from Washington, D.C. in terms of
Mm-hmm.
intel. And the one thing, of course, that he was not getting was the magic code breaking for the Japanese diplomatic code, which, to be fair, did not state anything about a Japanese attack on Hawaii at that time.
Yeah, because the Japanese weren't letting their diplomats know anything of that sort of nature. So yeah, I don't honestly know how much that would have helped him.
I don't think
I
it would
think
have helped him at all,
the
frankly.
yeah, the pushback to Kimmel on this front is if you see that there looks as if there's going to be a war coming, a prudent man would at least have battened down whatever hatches you can batten down in terms of your local defense as well. I mean, if you are concerned about sabotage and that sort of thing, yeah, I don't know. I don't know.
Which there is no, and again, maybe somebody knows that something that we don't know, but there is no real strong indication that Kimmel was concerned about sabotage. That was
Yeah,
Short's problem. And again, this goes
right.
back to the lack of communication between the two golfing buddies, is
Yeah.
that they're not talking shop when they're out there hanging out. And that's potentially a problem, and it obviously is. And another thing that stuck out to Kimmel in the note, and this goes back to what you said in the beginning, is that there was the phrase defensive deployment and war plan 46.
Hmm.
Kimmel, as we said, is a very offensive minded admiral. There was no defensive deployment in the
Right.
Pacific Fleet's vernaculars. And he does literally reads this and he says, what the hell is a defensive deployment? The Pacific Fleet is an offensive weapon. It's not something to sit and hide behind and, like a turtle, hide in your shell.
Yeah.
It's something to go out there and strike. That's why we're here,
Right.
theoretically. We're here in Hawaii to go out there and punch these people in the mouth. So that
Right.
whole defensive deployment baffled him. And in the War Plan 46, when he read that, he's like, oh, okay, that means that I have to start staging my fleet for go the
Yeah.
attack on the Marshall
The
Islands, which is
Marshals
what,
get ready to conduct offensive operations is basically the mindset that this would put him into.
yeah.
Oh well.
It's a very, very vague message. And again, this comes out in the investigation after the fact, is that Stark felt that the message was very clear. He felt that the message was this tells you what to do. According to Betty Stark, he said that after the fact, when he sent that message, he assumed, never checked, mind you, assumed
Hmm.
that husband Kimmel would start defensive patrols with the PBYs that, as we have already stated, he needed more of, and he needed more people to fly and more
Yeah,
parts to maintain, and never checked with Kimmel to see if indeed he was doing that.
right.
Why? God knows.
Lack of positive control.
Big time, big time. The only thing
Would
Kimmel did do, go ahead.
No, I was just, I'm doing a what if here and wondering to myself, what if Ernie King had been in charge at this point? Would Ernie King have put together a more prescriptive communique to Kimmel that says, I expect the following things to happen here in preparation for this war warning? I don't know, it's
I
hard to
I
say.
think I think he does, because if you look at the gray book and you look at the message, and I know you have, from December 31st, when Nimitz takes over, really until
He's a
after after
after
Midway, he's a
midway.
control freak.
He's a total control freak. Yeah.
Yeah. He's
Yeah.
telling Nimitz where to step and when to step,
Right.
and not letting Nimitz really do. I mean, well, we don't need to get into that,
Yeah,
but
their
he's an
relationship
uber control
eases up.
freak.
Yeah, and that evolution of that relationship is this sort of fascinating tale. Anyway, okay, so yeah, I'm persuaded that yes, that a more hands-on, forceful CNO would have produced a more prescriptive set of instructions for Kimmel as to if you're serious, husband, about doing a CYA exercise out here. Here are the things that I expect to be
Yeah.
accomplished, and
Yeah.
no, we got none of that. And so the
Kim,
net result is that we see no change in the overall pattern of behavior that Pacific Fleet has been evidencing up to this point.
not a lick.
Yeah,
Kimmel's going to continue to send his ships out to do their training, and they're going to come back, and they're going to, have the weekend
one
off,
more
and they're going
time.
to go party. Yeah.
Yep.
The one thing he does do, as we're going to see, and that does pay dividends, he does instruct his destroyers that if they see any submarine operating outside the harbor or any submerged object that they may encounter, sink
Attack
it,
it.
sink
Yep.
it. That is it. So Walter Short gets another war warning, or he gets a war warning. It is
Yep.
different. It is
Hmm.
different. And it goes like this. This comes from George Marshall, and it says negotiations with Japan appear to have terminated to all practical purposes, with only the barest possibilities that the Japanese government might come back and offer to continue. Japanese future action unpredictable, but hostile action possible at any moment. If hostilities cannot be avoided, the United States desires that Japan commit the first overt act. This policy should not be construed as restricting you to a course of action that might jeopardize your defense. Prior to hostile Japanese action, you are directed to undertake such reconnaissance and other measures as you deem necessary, but these measures should be carried out so as not to alarm civil population or disclose intent. Report measures taken.
Hmm.
No, in other words, go out there and go scout
Yep.
with
And
the
and the
six
sort of the
B-17s you have.
Well, yeah, but the corollary to that is that if you and husband Kimmel are golfing buddies and are on good terms, you at least could tell him, by the way, my boss is telling me that we should be scouting aggressively. You're the dude that's got the assets to do that. Could you make sure that you're covering my butt here and getting as
Mhm.
many of those PBYs up in the air as possible over the next few days? But that did not happen.
It did not. It did
Yeah.
not. And as I put in the notes, Short's reaction to the message was to do nothing.
Yeah.
Literally nothing, because as we said before, he doesn't have the aircraft with which to conduct long range patrols. He's
Right.
only got, a couple, three mobile radar stations, and they're only working when they need to work.
Yep.
And that's it.
And he's
That's literally
also
it.
getting the scuttlebutt from people like Kimmel's war plans officer, Sock McMorris, who's
Yes.
saying that any notion of the Japanese attacking Oahu is an absurdist fantasy, I believe are the words that he uses. So everyone's being kind of lulled into complacency here.
Yeah.
One of the things that struck me in this warning that goes out to Short is sort of the grist for a lot of the conspiracy theories that go on here.
Uh-huh.
The United States desires that Japan commit the first overt act. And that, there's been this whole school of thought that, oh, FDR knew, he knew, and he, set us up for failure. I'm here to tell you that if, in fact, you wanted the Japanese to commit the first overt act, there are much easier ways to get into a shooting war with the Japanese than getting half your battle fleet sunk at Pearl Harbor. And I've said this in
Exactly.
other venues as well. All you would have had to do is to signal to Tommy Hart out in the Philippines.
Hmm.
We have evidence that there are troop convoys moving out in the China Sea, moving troops down along the coast towards Malaya and whatnot. You send one four stacker
Yeah.
destroyer out to intercept one of those convoys. I guarantee you the Japanese are going to sink that puppy. And you
Hmm.
now have the Casus Belli that you wanted in the first place. And all it cost you was an obsolete destroyer and 200 American boys.
Yeah.
Instead of, yeah, I'll just expose my entire battle fleet to destruction
Right.
here and deliberately in Pearl Harbor. It's nonsense. It's
It's
ludicrous. It's
absolute.
it's stupid.
Absolute
Anyway,
nonsense. And when we do the attack episodes, which we're obviously ramping up towards, we'll talk about Roosevelt's and DC's reaction in general once they get
right.
news, because that night is of course this is night in Washington now when the news really starts rolling in, like the detailed reports, these guys are blown away. Literally, I mean, they're
Yeah.
like, what?
What? Yeah.
Who got where? What happened? It's very obvious. So.
Yeah.
Another thing, as things continue to wind up, as the war clouds darken,
Tarkin.
as they continue to darken, there was a gentleman named Arthur McCollum. Arthur McCollum worked in Washington, D.C. in naval intelligence. He felt that the war warning that was sent to Kimmel, specifically, and Tommy Hart, was rather vague. He was not part of the wordsmithing crew. He wasn't with Roy Ingersoll or Richmond Kelly Turner or Betty Stark. He read the same messages and was like, this doesn't
Oh,
say
Nandy
anything
Mandy.
about, yeah,
Right.
it doesn't say anything about Hawaii. And if we're actually concerned about Hawaii, we need to tell Hawaii, hey,
We're
we're
concerned about
concerned about it.
Hawaii. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
He wanted to send another message to Kimmel specifically,
Hmm.
not to Thomas Hart, but he wanted to send it to husband Kimmel to basically say, just so you know, you also are under this umbrella of threat, this threat umbrella. You need to make preparations to do whatever you need to do.
Right.
Just so you know, you are potentially a target. In order to have that message sent, which we do not know the exact wording of that message because apparently McCollum got so pissed off that he crumpled it up, threw it away, and never
Mm.
left, never retrieved it. He had to go through your best buddy, Richmond
Richard
Kelly Turner.
Turner. The man and the legend.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's Turner that basically puts the kibosh on this and tells McCollum, "No, we're not gonna send it for
Yeah.
reasons I don't understand." I mean, if you have any better understanding of that than I do,
I,
I,
I, I don't know.
yeah.
I don't know. Apparently, according to McCollum, who did several oral histories after the war, and I'm talking like in the 1950s, he
Hmm.
said he handed the message that he had scribbled down on a piece of paper to Kelly Turner and said, "This is what I want to send him." And apparently, Kelly Turner read it, handed it back to him, picked up the copy of the war warning that had been sent the day before, and said, "Is this not enough?"
Right,
And then flipped it back on the paper, or flipped it back on his desk, and then turned around and just ignored it. Of course, the question that everybody's wondering right now is, well, would that have been enough?
right.
We'll never know. We'll
We'll
never
never
know.
know.
But the fact of the matter is that several people in intelligence were like, this is not good enough. We need to let this guy know that
Right.
he's under the gun here potentially, and it never got there.
Well, and,
Yeah.
and as you point out too, McCollum had lived in Japan. Turner had not. McCollum had previously called Japanese moves correctly when they moved into China. Turner had incorrectly said, no, they're actually going to go to Mongolia. And so McCollum was a subject matter expert, if you will, and Turner was not. But of course, Turner's
He's the
character was
boss.
such, yeah, A, he's the boss, and B, he thinks he's smarter than any other person in the room about everything.
Yeah.
Everything. That was always Turner's, MO, was that he thinks everybody else is stupid. So I guess I would say that this is another example where Turner is going to manage to slip the hangman's noose.
Yes,
You
he
know,
does.
spoiler alert, Betty Stark is going to be essentially kicked upstairs as a
Mhm.
result for his partial culpability for what's going to go down on Pearl Harbor. He's going to be made the naval liaison to Great Britain in March or April. But Turner, he gets off scot free, despite the fact that he potentially could have given Kimmel a more strongly worded warning had he relented and let McCollum send what he wanted to send, whatever it was.
Yeah. And
We'll
we'll
never
never
know.
know. And we'll never
Never.
know. We'll never
Anyway,
know. So the day before the attack, December 6, 1941,
yeah,
husband Kimmel gave an interview with the Christian Science Monitor, of all things. And one of the questions that was asked to Kimmel specifically was there going to be a war in the Pacific? Now, again, Kimmel apparently in the interview smiled and lied and said, no, no, we're good. He had read the war warning. He knew, as we said all the way back in 1940, that sooner or later there's going to
later,
be a war in the Pacific with the Japanese. We just don't know when and we don't know where.
yeah,
So he completely lied to him, and he goes on to say that the Japanese were never going to attack the United States and Great Britain because it looked like at this stage the Soviets were going to hold out against the Germans, and that Japan did not want a two-front war. They're never going to attack the United States. Da 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 da. And just completely lies. And then I found this interesting too. I put in the notes is the bravado was a front because his aide, one of his Marine bodyguards, for all intents and purposes, he gets up and he leaves this interview, which is in his headquarters in the submarine building, and the submarine right there, not far from Makalapa. And
yeah,
he like grabs his stomach. He's like, "Man, my stomach's not feeling good. I feel terrible." And he was wound up, is what he was.
yeah,
He was wound up. He was a ball of nerves. He was very concerned, not
yeah.
necessarily about Pearl Harbor, but about the situation as it was. And
And am I
he
going to
was very
perform
concerned.
adequately in an offensive capability when I have to bring the war to the Japanese in the Marshall Islands? And
Yeah,
so, yeah,
yeah. No, he knew that at some point he was going to be involved in this conflict. He did not, of
yeah,
course, know how or when.
yes,
Yeah, he was, as I put in the notes, he was aware that the Japanese had changed their codes. He was aware that Leighton had still not been able to locate the carriers. He was also aware that the Japanese naval radio traffic was buzzing with, as we know now, is, you know, fake traffic, for lack of a better term.
yep,
He also knew that dozens of their ships were on the move,
yep.
and he was aware that things were getting ready to boil. That
Yeah, we're getting ready to go here. There's just, yeah, nobody knows exactly where.
that afternoon on the 6th of December, he meets with his staff and he says, basically, he asked them, "Hey, look, here's A, B, C, D, E, F, G. What do you guys think we ought to do? Should we take defensive measures? And if so, what?" And it was decided through conversation that nothing else would be done than what they'd already done, which was frankly very little. There would be no additional security to the fleet in Pearl Harbor. There would be no additional destroyer patrols, nothing out there, nothing. He figured what was the situation as it was at that moment was good enough for that
Hmm.
time. So that same afternoon, Edwin Layton brought Admiral Pai a report from Thomas Hart stating that recon in the Philippines had spotted, quote, 3 dozen Japanese transports and 28 warships.
Again, if you want to get into a shooting war, there's the formation that you go out and snoop. So,
Mhm.
anyway,
Layton read the message and he immediately took it for what it was. He's like, this is it. We're
right.
going to war and it's going to happen in the next 24 hours. And he fully believed that it was going to happen in the Philippines. Pai read the message and suggested he gives it to Kimmel. He added that he felt that the Japanese would not attack the Philippines. This is William Pye saying this, and certainly not Hawaii, quote, "We are too strong," unquote. Kimmel read the same message and literally snorted at Layton's relation of Pye's response. So, in other words, Kimmel read this and goes, "Yeah, they're totally going to attack.
Yeah,
They're
they're
going to
totally
attack the
good.
Philippines, but they're not going to do
Yeah,
it here."
right.
Yeah. So he goes that afternoon, he goes to his house in Makalapa, which was brand new at that time. Of course, this is the same house that Nimitz is going to live in, and changes into civilian clothes. He goes to the Halekulani Hotel that night, goes to a party, has a couple of drinks, dances with some ladies, goes back to his house and goes back to sleep. He had a early wake up call the following morning for a golf date with Walter Short. That date, of course, is going to be December the 7th. And I put this in because I thought this was very, very poignant. At the same time, Kimmel's at his party at the Halekulani, a gentleman named William Outerbridge, who had
Mhm.
taken over as skipper of the USS Ward.
Lord.
The destroyer Ward is on an anti-submarine patrol at the mouth of the harbor. He had taken over as skipper the day before.
Yes, sir.
The
And
day.
that factors in to some things that are going to happen later on in the early morning of December 7th.
Mhm.
The ward has a soft spot in my heart because, of course, a large proportion of her crew were Minnesota boys, and we still have is the number three gun, or I can never remember, but the gun from the ward that ends up hitting that mini sub sits out on our state capitol grounds to this
I did
day.
not know that.
Yes, sir. Been to it a couple of
That's
times. They're actually getting ready to. They may actually have already moved it to a museum where it can actually be out of the elements.
oh, that's good.
Yeah, but yeah,
That's good.
the gun from the ward is sitting there. So
Yeah, I did not know
yes,
that. I'll have to see that if I make
yeah,
my way up
up
to
to the
the great state
fabulous
of
cities.
Minnesota.
Now I'll take you there. So
That'd be
anyway,
awesome.
so
So
now as day darkens under darkening war clouds of darkness, you know, go ahead and read us the message from the CO, Captain
Ward's
Otterbridge.
Ward's objective that day is to basically just make these lazy little laps across the entrance of the harbor and look for any
Yep,
submarines. And if he sees a submarine, he's supposed to figure out if it's bad guy or not. And if it is, he's supposed to sink it.
yep.
So that night, he writes a letter to his wife, and it goes like this. Part of it goes like this. He says, quote, "Hope I can have a happy, hardworking, and efficient ship." Again, remember, he took over the day before. I can't tell you much about how it feels to be a captain, but so far it is very fine. These
Got your
boys
own
on,
cabin, dude.
yeah, yeah. These boys on here are all very good. I was particularly impressed with the spirit of the crew. They seem to be above average. Don't worry, dear. I'll be fine. Besides, December is my lucky month. Unquote.
Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun, dun.
Excellent.
Oh, man.
I think the war clouds have darkened sufficiently darkly at this point that we can leave this one off here.
Yeah, I'm gonna say that this is gonna be the it's not a rain shower out there. It's a thunderstorm.
Yeah, it's a coming.
It's a big one, and it is definitely coming. Is there anything else you want to add to this one?
I don't think so, sir.
All right, let's wrap this bad boy up. So with that, we want to thank you very much for listening and or watching to our conversation. Please give us a like and subscribe and all that good stuff if you choose to do so. If you have a comment, not a question, a comment, send it to unauthorized Pacific Podcast at gmail.com. And I am not going to do a song and dance. So that episode aired this week where we went with Craig.
Yeah.
And you said that no, I said that nobody listens to the ending part of our episode. I said I could do a song and dance and nobody would know. Well, apparently I'm wrong because a lot of people do watch to the end and they've
Oh,
challenged me to do a
to
song and dance. And
the
I'm just
bitter
going to tell you
end.
now, yeah, ain't going to
No,
happen,
not
brother.
happening. Okay.
Ain't happening. Nope.
All right.
I got to have a lot of alcohol in me to do that. And that is
Okay.
not, now is not the time.
Now is not that time.
No,
Excellent.
it is not. So, again, thank you very much for listening and or watching. My name is Seth Paridon. John, as always, my friend, thank you as always for being here.
Yep. I'm John Parshall, and thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next week.